On page 12 is an overview of the abstractors fee fund. The table at the top shows that this is an agency that is 100% funded by the fee fund. And the fee fund is comprised of three main sources, which are the three licensing fees, the three licensing fees, the original and renewal fee, the license fee totaling $75, an examination fee, which is $70, and an additional examination fee, which is $50. And these fees were last updated in 2015. I would also like to note that 90% of the fees collected are kept in the agency's fee fund, and then 10% is put into the state general fund up to $100,000. On the following page, page 13, is an overview of the fee fund's ending balance, and there's also at the bottom of that first table monthly highest and ending or lowest ending balance. The fee fund is holding fairly steady. There is a slight decrease through the 3 fiscal years, and that's mostly due to a slight decline in licenses over the fiscal years as well. The bottom of that page shows the licensure fees, and there is an asterisk in the statutory limit for the examination and additional examination fee because the statute cited does not have a statutory maximum listed. And then the final page is the FTE positions, and that will also reflect 0 across the board. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Reeder? Representative Delberdane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm debating whether to grill her on the $13 or the $1, but here we go. Now, I've got one curiosity question. Specific to the fee, well, the overall budget, the $25,716. If it says in here the increase is primarily, primarily due to expenditures for salaries and wages, benefits, et cetera. But how can you have that if there's no FTEs? Why is there nothing in here for an FTE, just for an accountability?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, although the executive secretary does not show up as a full FTE position, she still has, she's still paid from the agency's fee fund, and she does get some fringe benefits, and those adjustments are made according to the budget indices provided by the Division of Budget.
Yeah, it's kind of a frustrating thing. They've got a computer program that they run their salaries through, and then it tells them the numbers they're supposed to use. So sometimes you'll see those minor variations. I mean, it shows up real clear in this one.
Yeah, I've sat in another committee, general government budgets, where you get into half or a quarter of an FTE, and it was kind of interesting. There's nothing on here, but yet you got fee, wages and salary stuff. So,
is there any, Elena? Can you find out just for our interest if it's ever been considered a half-fee FTE or what the background on that is? And you don't have to do it right now. We can do it later. It's just a point of interest because I would have thought it would have been a half FTE too, and I can't remember if we changed it for some reason or if it's never been that way.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I will look into that for you and let you know.
Any other questions? Okay, let's go on to the presentation by the Executive Director, Sean Herrick. Sean, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you figure out good. Oh, there she is. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, I just have a real short, and I won't read it word for word. I'm sure you've got it and you can read it, but took over the position or assumed the position for Glenn McQueen and his assistant Patricia Zelmer, who are in their 80s and decided after 30 years they would retire. and I've had the position for a little over a year, and there was very little, if very little training, but it's not a real complicated position. So I can report that we have mostly renewed all of the licensees for 2021 and went through the process this year. They expire December 31st, go on a calendar year, and it's we're almost through all of them. A few of them lag behind the first of the year, waiting for their bonds to come, proof of their bonds to come to me before I can give them their license. So that's primarily the reason they're not all renewed by December 31st. There to date, there are 192 employee licenses from 2020, and of those for 2021, 186 have renewed to date. And there were 174. It's the word is operative licenses, which is the business from 2020, and for 2021, 163 of those have renewed. There are a few that have not renewed. There are not very many people, young folks getting into the business, so there are fewer each year. But it's been pretty stable over the last few years. Our fees are adequate to support our operations despite not changing this fee structure since 2012. And I noticed in Elena's testimony, she said it was updated in 2015, but it must have stayed the same. We did conduct one round of exams despite the pandemic via Zoom, and 2 sat for the exam and 2 passed. Both of them were doing parts of the exam. There's 4 parts of the exam, and if they fail a part, they can retake only the part they failed. Our current board, Roger Hannaford III, from Marion, Kansas, Jill Renard from Manhattan, and Geraldine Stoll from La Crosse, Kansas, are longtime members of the industry and support me and I am not an abstractor, so they help me tremendously. We have not used any pandemic funding. That was one question I was asked to report. And with that, I would stand for any questions or concerns.
Any questions? I do have a couple because I'm going to be asked these later when I try to go through appropriations. But in 2020, to the best of your knowledge, in 2020, we had expenses of approximately $22,000, and yet our budget is about $25,000. Do you know what where that difference comes in? I'm sure it's certain planned expenditures in case they don't come in as expected, but.
Right, that might be part of it, and I can claim a little bit of ignorance as to where they came up with their budget numbers, other than based on past experiences and not knowing the historical knowledge. But I can tell you, we normally have a board meeting or two, and our board members and myself travel someplace. When we have our exams, we normally sit at a place and rent a room, and none of that happened this year. We didn't have any travel expenses or meeting room rental. So there's some of the expense right there. Also, I am doing things a little bit differently, I think, than Patricia or Ms. Zillner did it. I am printing licenses off of my computer, doing some things by email rather than snail mail. So there's some postage and printing expenses that I think are not as expensive.
And this is not an important question. Are you in Hugoton also?
I am not. I'm in Topeka, America.
Oh, great, great. Well, I'm from Liberal, so I knew Glenn McQueen personally.
Yeah.
Hugoton is 30 miles from there, so I was just curious if it stayed out there.
It did not, and he and his daughter actually brought a trailer and a truck and brought literally a trailer load of files that are in a storage now.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, well, hey, thank you for your testimony, and thanks for being one of the true, what I want to say, you know, you're a real person doing a government job, you know, so anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is going to be an overview on Board of Technical Professions. Elena?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Again, I'm Elena Rutter. I'm a legislative fellow at KLRD, and I will be presenting the Board of Technical Professions budget for you today. The Board of Technical Professions is made up of 5 professions: engineering, land surveying, architecture, geology, and landscape architecture. Their mission is to provide maximum protection of public health, safety, and welfare of the people of Kansas by assuring that architects, engineers, geologists, landscape architects, and land surveyors are properly qualified based on statutes and the board's rules and regulations, and to establish and maintain high standards of integrity, skills, and practice. Also present today is the Executive Director of the Board of Technical Professions, Larry Carnes, and he will be available to provide testimony and answer questions after my presentation as well. On the first page of the budget analysis, again, is an overview of the agency's budget for the 3 fiscal years. Again, it is a biennial agency, which is why fiscal year 2023 is included. On the FTE line at the bottom, you'll notice there is not 0. There is 5 FTEs at the Board of Technical Professions, which include the Executive Director, a Public Service Administrator, and 3 administrative specialists. Page 2 provides an agency overview and major issues from prior years. If you look on page 2 under the agency overview and the last paragraph on the right side, there's an overview of how many licenses the board currently has in the 5 professions, and also a total of individuals and business entities. If you're interested in seeing totals for how many of these 5 professions there are in the state of Kansas. On page 3 begins the budget summary and key points, and that continues on to page 4. Page 5 has performance measures, which highlights also individual licenses, business licenses, and then renewals for both of those. And then without any objections, I would like to move on to page 9, which is the overview for fiscal year 2021. In fiscal year 2021, the agency requests a revised estimate of $780,918, all from the Board of Technical Professions Fee Fund, and this is the same amount that was approved by the 2020 Legislature. And the revised estimate includes 5 FTE positions, which is also the same number approved by the 2020 Legislature. I will note that there is a $999 swap in the major categories of expenditure. Salaries and wages increased by $999, and contractual services decreased by $999, but the end result is still the same amount that was approved by the 2020 Legislature. On the next page, page 10, you will see commodities and capital outlay, and also that the governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. On page 11 is fiscal year 2022, and the agency requests fiscal year 2022 operating expenditures of $786,172, all from the Board of Technical Professions Fee Fund. This is an increase of $5,254, or 0.7%, above the agency's fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. And this increase is primarily attributable to expenditures for salary and wages and contractual services. And the request includes funding for 5 FTE positions, which is the same number and included in the agency's fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. The major increases in fiscal year 2022 happen in salaries and wages and contractual services. In salaries and wages, there's an increase in the employer's contributions to retirement and group health insurance. And then in contractual services, the increase is primarily due to expenditures for postage, printing services and equipment, and the state building's operating charge. And the agency further detailed that their expenses for postage and printing were to be able to print certificates for professional licenses and certificates of authorization, and then being able to mail those along with renewal notices, exam scores, and other official correspondence. And the governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 2022 request. On the following page, page 13, is fiscal year 2023. And the agency requests fiscal year 2023 operating expenditures of $792,991. And it says all from special revenue funds, and I would just like to point out that I made a mistake when typing this up. And although it says all from special revenue funds, that doesn't mean it's different than the previous 2 fiscal years. This year is also all from the Board of Technical Professions Fee Fund. The amount for fiscal year 2023 is an increase of $5,919, or 0.8% above the agency's fiscal year 2022 request. This increase is primarily attributable to expenditures for salaries and wages and contractual services like it was in fiscal year 2022, and it also includes funding for 5 FTE positions. The increases in salaries and wages are for old age survivors and disabilities insurance and also group health insurance. And these are partially offset by decreases in Medicare contributions, which is why their overall increase for salaries and wages is only $1,919. On the following page, page 14, you'll see detailed contractual services, which is an increase of $4,000 or 1% above the agency's fiscal year 2022 request. This is the main reason for the agency's fiscal year 2023 increase overall. And the increase in contractual services is primarily due to expenditures for building security and building work orders, fees for the Kansas Register, the monumental building surcharge, and investigators. And then there's also postage and printing and binding services again, so the agency can mail licenses and other official correspondence as needed. And the governor again concurred with the agency's fiscal year 2023 request. On page 15 is the governor's recommended salary and wage adjustments. And again, this agency has no longevity payments in any of the 3 fiscal years. Page 16 details the Technical Professions Fee Fund. And again, this is an agency that retains 90% of the fees collected and then remits 10% into the state general fund up to $100,000. Page 17 is an overview of the ending balance for the Board of Technical Professions, and over the 3 fiscal years, the balance is holding fairly steady with a slight increase. And then the bottom shows the licensure fees, and none of those are at the statutory limit except the replacement license certificate at the bottom, which is $20. And the final page, page 19, is the FTE table, and it shows you that there are 5 FTEs across all 3 fiscal years. And that concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Have any questions for Elena? Okay, if not, we'll move on to agency testimony by Mr. Carnes. Mr. Carnes, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Mr. Carnes, we never got any written testimony from you on this agency. Did you not prepare any?
I did not. I was unaware that I needed to. I just noticed this hearing a day or two ago, and I called and asked what I needed to do, and they just put me on the schedule. I'm more than happy to submit written testimony. I just wasn't aware that it was necessary.
Yeah, I'm sorry I got left out. Our analysts were supposed to have sent a memo. We need 3 things specifically addressed other than anything else that you care to share with us. But for instance, and I'll try to get some written notes, I have to report this out very quickly in appropriations. And again, I'm sorry for the time crunch. We only even found out about our dates last week. So
What do you need? What can I get for you?
one, we need to know how much you received in COVID-related funding through the CARES Act or any other COVID-related sources.
I think I know the answer to that. I think it's less than $100.
Yeah, it's not very big on some of them, but it's one of the things they're wanting us to find out in appropriations. The other thing that I need a little more detail in is your fiscal year 2020 expenditures were around $650,000. I'm sure you've answered this before. And your estimate for 2021 is $780,000. And going forward, it runs in that range. So what constitutes that difference between actual expenditures and the amount you're requesting to be budgeted?
Generally, I can tell you that it depends on how many complaints we have and how many investigations we have to conduct and how many hearings we have to have. If complaints and investigations are down, our total costs are down. If not, then we budget for a higher amount. Fortunately, we haven't had to spend that much money.
Right, and that's kind of the way I remember it. But when I'm on the spot answering that question, it'll be hard for me to remember that one. So if you can get it
Happy to
me.
do so, sir. Sure.
That is kind of the way I remember it, though, now that I remember it. I've been reminded. Yes, Larry? Or Representative Weigel?
Yeah, I had a little question to ask. On your contractual services, what is the monumental building surcharge?
You're on mute. We couldn't hear you, Larry.
I can't answer that. I really don't know what that surcharge is.
I think, and maybe Elaine or one of the other analysts that's on can help us with that, but there are certain things around here that they charge each of the agencies for, like, well, you know, they charge them $100,000 or 10% of their fee to cover some of the general expenses of the state. And I think almost every budget has that monument
I've never
charge.
seen that before, so I just.
Yeah. It was on one of the
one
other.
other follow-up, if I may. What are the expenditures for investigators for that $2,000? Is that contracted out, and who does that? And what are the reasons for that?
We're a licensing agency licensing 5 different professions: engineers, geologists, architects, land surveyors, and landscape architects. We periodically get complaints about people in those professions having violated provisions of the Kansas Technical Professions Act. These are technical professions. The complaints are technical in nature about something that a licensed professional may have not done correctly, or done outside their area of practice, or practice without a license or without a certificate of authority. The board hires outside investigators in those particular fields to investigate those technical complaints. We maintain a list of potential investigators. People apply to us. Before I came a year and a half ago, they had just put out a request for bid for different investigators to go on the list. We maintain a list for each one of those 5 professions. When a complaint comes in, we contact those. Unfortunately, sometimes we run into conflicts of interest because people in these professions know each other. And we have to go down the list until we find someone that's close in the geographical area and that doesn't have a conflict to prepare an investigative report. We hire them, they do that within 30 or 60 days, and we take the case to our complaint committee. And then depending on what happens, our assistant attorney general may or may not file charges against that person, and we may proceed to an administrative hearing on their license.
Okay, these aren't sworn police officers, are they, or are they?
The investigators are not, no, they're architects, engineers, others that are in the
They're
profession.
people inside the profession that they're like a peer review type person, correct?
Yeah, that would be accurate, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what I need to, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? You got anything else you'd like to add, Larry? Any comments?
I've been there for about a year and a half. I came over from the Department of Labor where I was the director of workers' compensation. It's a very small agency, but we're efficient. We have about 30,000 total licensees. About 2/3 of those are non-residents who are licensed by reciprocity in our various professions. It's a well-run little agency. I'm happy to be there.
Well, great, and thank you for your service. So if you can get us that written testimony, do you know what day I report this out? Is it Wednesday that I have to report out? I believe I have to report out Wednesday, so if you could try to get us something tomorrow, I would appreciate it very much.
I'll certainly do so, sir. Not a problem.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing further, we'll move on to the next agency. Thank you. All right. Next agency is Board of Indigent Defense Services, and Martin DeBoer is going to talk to us give us a budget overview on that one. Martin, are you on?
Yes, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
All right, thank you. I'll be giving the overview on the Board of Indigent Defense Services. The first page, page 1, gives you a general overview of the agencies. The Board of Indigent Defense Services, also known as BIDS, is a state agency tasked with providing and supervising constitutionally and statutorily required legal services for indigents accused of felonies. You could turn the page to page 4. On page 4, you will see a general overview of their performance measures, which were identified by the agency and the governor's office. Next couple of pages will give you a little bit of an overview of their timeline over the last 10 years. If you could turn the page, I'd like to start on page 7 with fiscal year 2021. At the bottom of the page, on page 7, the agency estimates revised expenditures of $35.4 million. This includes 34.8 from the SGF for FY21. 34.8, sorry, for SGF for 21. This is an all funds decrease of 3.3 million and an SGF decrease of 3.3 million below the FY21 approved amount. The SGF decrease is primarily attributable to a lapse from the FY 2020 reappropriated funds in the amount of 3.4 million. The revised estimate includes special revenue fund increase of $11,472 above the FY 21 approved amount. This increase is attributable to a fee fund carry forward from the Indigent Defense Services fee fund and the in-service education fee fund. The revised estimate includes 200.8 FTE positions, which is 1.1 FTE positions above the 21 approved number. And according to the agency, the accounting system classified temporary positions as FTE positions, so there should not be an increase. That 1.1, just to clarify, the 1.1 was a clerical issue. If you turn the page to page 8, below the breakdown of the categories of expenditure, you'll see the governor's recommendation towards the middle of the page. The governor recommends expenditures of $32.4 million, including $31.7 from the SGF for 21. This is an all funds decrease of $3 million or 8.4% and an SGF decrease of $3.1 million or 9% below the agency's FY21 revised estimate. The decrease is due to the governor recommending a reduction to the assigned counsel program of $3 million based on the fall 2020 assigned counsel caseload projections. In addition, the governor Governor only recommended part of the agency's supplemental requests, including $147,141, all from the State General Fund for the IT security. This recommendation also includes 199.7 FTE positions, which is the adjustment of the 1.1 FTE positions that were classified incorrectly and should not have been counted as FTE positions. Below that, you'll see the supplemental request. At the very bottom of the page, on page 8, the agency requests $267,141, all from the State General Fund. This is for IT security and remote working equipment. The supplemental request is detailed on page 9. For the IT security, the request was $147,141. This was to address issues from identified by the May 2019 security audit conducted by the Kansas Legislative Division of Post Audit. And this request addresses the items that the agency has deemed to require immediate attention. These items include the equipment upgrades, safety equipment, structural changes to the offices, and additional security measures. And the following bullets below will outline each one of those individually. I would like to jump down to the laptop computers, the next bullet, next black bullet. The agency requests $120,000 all for the procurement of additional 60 laptops in order to maintain the remote working capabilities for its employees. The agency states that this purchase would allow employees to continue working from home and while limiting to COVID-19 exposure. In addition to this equipment, will allow employees to maintain contact with incarcerated clients during the COVID-19 outbreak and allow for court appearances during remote court proceedings at both trial and appellate levels. The additional laptops will replace the existing outdated equipment. Now, this request, the request for this equipment was part of their Coronavirus Relief Fund operational expenditure application through the Office of Recovery and the Department of Administration. And the funding for this was approved by this from the CRF after the budget was submitted. So the governor recommends the $147,141, all from the State General Fund, to address the IT security measures. I'll stand for questions before I go into the governor's allotments.
Any questions? We have to make sure that we're not leaving Representative Hauser and Representative Victor's out. Representative Hauser and Representative Victor's, if you can hear me, make sure you raise your hand or something. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask questions if you have any. Okay, let's go ahead, Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the bottom of page 9, you'll have the beginning of the governor's allotments. For this agency, on the last paragraph, the allotment adjusts total of $346,850. The allotments applied in the agency as followed on the following page, on page 10. At the top of the page, page 10, you'll see the table, and it identifies the CAPERS death and disability of $103,083, as well as a coronavirus relief swap for $243,771.
Martin,
And with
what's
that, I'll
that mean? What's a coronavirus relief swap? What is that? Do you know?
I believe this is where there was funding, and then there was the funding was granted through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So instead of SGF money, they were granted the Coronavirus Relief funding. So it replaces SGF funding.
Heather, could you give me the amount of coronavirus relief funds you received? Is it in your testimony already? No, I want you to do it when your time comes, but I didn't see it in your testimony. Was it in there and I just didn't read close enough? Yeah, I mean, tomorrow would be fine if you could get it for me. Go ahead, Martin.
Thank you. Would you like me to begin on fiscal year 2022?
Yeah.
All right. On page 10, towards the bottom of the page, below the table, the agency requests $51.5 million, including $50.9 from the SGF for fiscal year 2022. This is an all funds increase of $16.1 million, and an SGF increase of $16.1 above the FY21 revised estimate. The increase is primarily due to the agency's enhancement request for funding to cover upgrading information technology, security, measures the assigned council rate increase, implementation of a case management system, and staffing enhancements. The request also includes 294.8 FTE positions, which is an increase of 94 FTE positions above the 21 approved amount. This increase is entirely due to the agency's caseload staffing enhancement requests. On page 11, following the breakdown of the categories of expenditures, in the middle of the page, the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends expenditures of $38.2 million, including $37.6 million from the SGF. The SGF decrease of $13.3 million is below the agency's request. The decrease is primarily attributable to the governor only recommending part of the agency's enhancement request for $4.1 million on all SGF for recruiting and retention. The decrease is also attributable to the governor recommending part of the agency's reduced resources budget. The decreases are partially offset due to an increase of $342,983 for the assigned council caseload estimates. The recommendation includes 199.7 FTE positions, which is 95.1 FTE positions below the agency request. This decrease in FTE positions is due to the governor not recommending the enhancements that include 94 FTE positions and the correction of technical error that counted temporary positions as 1.1 FTE positions. Below that, at the bottom of the page, on page 11, you have a breakdown of the enhancements in the table. Following the table, the enhancement request for ethical caseload staffing was for $7.8 million, all from the state general fund and 94 FTE positions. Following request is the immediate recruitment and retention for $4.1 million, all from the state general fund. You have a assigned council rate increase of $3.6 million, all from the state general fund. And you have an enhancement request for the IT security, remote working equipment, and case management system for $467,141, all from state general fund. On the following page, on page 12, my apologies. Let's skip to page 13. Each one of those items listed in the table are broken down in more detail following that table. On page 13, in the middle of the page, you have the governor recommendation. The governor recommends the $4.1 million, all from the state general fund, for the agency's enhancement request for the retention and recruitment enhancement. With that, I'll stand for questions before entering the reduced resources budget.
Any questions? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to back up to maybe page 9, jumping into 11. I don't know if they correspond, but when you were on page 9, I did have a question on where the governor recommended the $147,141 toward the bottom there for IT security measures, but I did not quite grasp the laptop computers. Are they recommended? Or are they not? I never seen anything from that.
All right. So the laptop computer request was also submitted for CRF funding earlier in the summer. And the agency has indicated that they did receive that funding. So that additional request for the laptop computers is no longer needed, according to the agency.
Okay,
That's my understanding.
Okay, so then that leads to part 2. Is that the reason for the 94 FTE decrease for the following year? Was that part of the laptop rollout or anything, or totally separate?
That is a totally separate enhancement request. So that enhancement request is part of the ethical caseload staffing request, which is the first one of the $7.8 million. I'm looking at page 11 at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay, and there it'll note that the $7.8 million and 94 FTE positions to address the chronic attorney caseload issues and insufficient support staff.
Okay, I'm good.
Other questions? Okay, if none, go ahead, Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. So on page 13, the bottom half of the page, we have the 2022 reduced resources budget. Below the table, the agency submits a reduced resources budget totaling $3.5 million, all from the state general fund. The agency makes note that this would result in reduced staff hours, including furloughs, layoffs, and the elimination of unfilled positions, along with the holding of assigned council claims. And the governor recommends partially adopting the agency's reduced resources budget and reducing expenditures only for the assigned council. So if you look at the chart above, you'll notice that the governor only recommends the 1.7 million to adjust the assigned council rate.
So does everybody kind of understand what happened there? The governor wanted all of the agencies to come up with a 10% cost reduction moving forward approximately. And straighten me out, Martin, if I'm straying from reality here. But so agencies were supposed to come up with a 3.5% reduction. In this case, these are the things that they said, if we have to cut $3.5 million, this is about the only way we can do it. So the governor looked at those things, and then she said, because of some of the problems we know in this agency, you know, it's not realistic to do any of those except the assigned council. Now, and this is just me, and Martin, please correct me if I'm wrong. One of my concerns about even the $1.7 million cut is this agency in November normally looks at their caseload throughout the year, and then there's a statutory way for them to increase the funding because we've got a constitutional responsibility to fund this defense. So even though we're cutting 1.7 million, it should not be a huge surprise if we don't wind up putting something like this 1.7 million back in November when their caseload group meets.
Yes,
Martin?
and then, Mr. Chairman, I would like to clarify, it is a 10% reduced resources package. So that the agencies have been asked to present a reduced resources package of 10%, which is what you will see in any agency that has state general funds. And the way the assigned council works is the assigned council there's an assigned council caseload meeting twice a year, once in April, once in October, where we review the historical and current data. And as a consensus between the agency bids, the division of the budget and the Legislative Research Department, we come to a determination of what those caseload projections should be.
Okay, any other questions? All right. Next, Martin.
All right. On the following pages, you'll have a breakdown of programs. This will break down the agency by program. They do have multiple programs: administration, the assigned council, legal services. I'm looking on page 16. Legal services for prisoners, the appellate defender, the trial public defenders, and the capital defense. And the remaining pages will break down those budgets even further. And I believe that ends my overview. I'll stand for any further questions.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Martin. Committee, if you'll look in your documentation, we have written testimony by Marla Luckert, the Chief Justice of the Kansas Supreme Court. Most of these are neutral testimony, but they're stating that there is a need in this area. We have another one by Karen Arnold Berger with the Supreme Court Ad Hoc Pretrial Justice Task Force, and then other testimony by Attorney General Derek Schmidt. Alexis, do you know if any of these plan to give live testimony, or are they all just written only? Just written. Okay. Okay. So next up, we'll have a presentation by Heather Cessna, Executive Director of the Board of Indigent Services. And we saw Heather just a couple of weeks ago. Welcome to the committee, Heather.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee, for having me. I feel like I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Like, is there a way to turn it down a little bit?
Does anybody have a mic on at any of their deals? Excuse me?
Okay. It sounds okay now. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah.
Martin, can you hear Ms. Cessna?
If I'm talking now? Okay. Oh, but it's gonna come back. Okay. I'll let the IT come in. Lots of feedback. Oh, sorry. It's not too bad. Do you want me to start talking? Okay. I appreciate you giving me the time to talk this morning, or this afternoon, I guess. And the main points that I wanted to make this afternoon, obviously, last week you heard a presentation on all of our issues in our staffing report that we gave. I think that helps to give you some of the background information that you need for some of these questions, because there are a lot of questions here. The main point. All right, is that better? Can you hear me now still? Okay. It is. Can you hear me okay? Okay. As I was saying, I mean, the main point that I wanted to make today is that we are definitely desperately in need, and that I don't think there's any way to sort of sugarcoat the fact that we are going to have to put additional money into our public defender system. What we've tried to present as part of these requests is a way to do that will hopefully have the biggest impact on alleviating or offsetting at least some of those costs. I will tell you right up front, none of the things that we have proposed are going to be able to completely pay for themselves. But what we've tried to do is present things in a way that will hopefully alleviate down the line costs so that some of these requests are offset by that. And so I provided extensive written testimony to support some of those requests and explain where some of that savings is coming from. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into our fiscal year 2022 request, because that really is kind of where the meat of the controversy is. The main point that we want to make there is that our first request, above and beyond anything else, is that we would like to avoid any reduced resources budget. Obviously, our problems are already big enough without adding additional cuts to that. There was, as part of the caseload consensus meeting, a little bit of a reduction in our assigned counsel. That was based on our numbers from November or from October, based on our lack of assigned counsel that was coming in because of COVID, and that's partially as a result of the slowdown in the court system. We do anticipate that it's not that there weren't cases there, it's just that they weren't being completed, and those assigned counsel payments were not coming in to be paid for vouchers. So we do anticipate that those cases are going to come in as the court system picks back up, and there's certainly a much bigger push right now to push those cases through than there was last summer. The question is whether or not it comes in before the fiscal year or the end of the fiscal year. So basically our request is probably going to come back in April, once we have a better chance of what those numbers look like now that things are starting to move a little bit more quickly. To address some of the questions I know you have already had, the governor did an interesting thing with her recommendations. She recommended our package request that goes to recruitment and retention. In our enhancement for fiscal year 2022, that specific request was entirely related to additional pay and salary adjustments based on pay parity with prosecutors, pay parity with other government employees, and that was a amount of money that was come up with by our board with my direction after we created new pay scales and had our board look at those pay scales. And our board consists of 5 attorneys and 3 public members right now. The board looked at those pay scales and determined that if we could get the money to fund those pay scales to fix some of those pay parity issues, that is what we would go forward with. And so then we did adjustments based on what it would take to move from our current pay situation to what those pay scales would look like applied to our actual employees. So that's where a big chunk of that request came from. That request did not include any additional staffing. And our caseload staffing issue is its own problem, and it's one of our biggest problems. The governor did not expressly recommend our staffing adjustment, which is one of our other enhancements, but did include language in her recommendation that if we needed to split some of that money from the recruitment and retention into additional new staff positions, that we could do so. So she kind of adjusted the language of our enhancement request, but our original enhancement request did not include on that portion additional staffing. So that's why when you look at what our request is versus what her recommendations are, it gets a little confusing there. And I can explain that in more detail as well. As far as our...
Can I ask you one question?
Yes.
So, but according to the documentation we have, she didn't increase your FTEs at all.
No. She gave us the option to be able to use that money for additional positions or raises or additional training division as we saw fit. So that would, and I'll be really honest, there is really no way that we can get away with not having to add additional positions because our caseload problem is so significant. I think that right there is going to be, a problem going forward if we end up at the basis of a lawsuit based on the constitutionality of the public defender system. It's going to be based on those caseloads.
So have you guys gave any thought, obviously if the 4 million is going to go to raises, I want to see what we're taking, who from what position to what positions. We may be creating some new positions, I know you mentioned, but have you gave a thought about how, if you only get that 4 million, what positions you're going to allocate it to, and what the raises would be for the existing personnel?
Yeah, and that's something that we're currently working on in order to, there's a couple of different considerations there. I know there's a 2.5% raise for state employees. That's a separate recommendation for all state employees. So depending on how that works out, that could affect some of the analysis as far as what we would want to do with that. I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to create new public defender positions. And this is one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to talk about this in a little more detail, is to explain why this is slightly problematic. Is that what we would have to do because of our caseload problem is we would have to create some additional new public defender positions. We figured out based on our caseloads from 2020, which were suppressed because of COVID, that we would need an additional 26 new public defender positions to meet those national standards. Well, those 26 new public defender positions are not the entirety of what our enhancement request was for the new positions. That also included the support staff to go with it based on the appropriate support staff ratios that are also nationally recommended. So we're talking investigators and paralegals and support staff as well. The problem is that we are going to need to create new public defender positions in order to address our caseload problem. But then if we don't have the additional staffing to go with that, what we end up doing is having public defenders who are being paid attorney salaries that are also then having to take on handling all of the investigation and the paralegal work and the support staff work at an attorney wage, which isn't a particularly good use of money. But when you're caught between a rock and a hard place where you have to have the funding or the positions to address the caseloads, if that's where you have to put your money because that's all you have, it ends up being an inefficient use of resources, which is one of the reasons why, as a part of our staffing request, we included the appropriate staffing to go with those attorneys so that we're not paying those attorneys for the support staff work that really you should be paying support staff for. And so that's one of the reasons why our requests are kind of all interrelated. We've got the caseload problem that relates to the staffing issues. We have our turnover problem, which is part of what creates our staffing issues and our caseload problems, because if we can't keep our experienced attorneys, then we end up spending more money on those salaries while we try to get those people up to speed if we hire a new person to replace an experienced person, and that costs us a certain amount of money. And then we have the addition of, in the meantime, we're putting a lot of pressure on our assigned counsel program, and they're starting to leave their panels because we're not paying enough and because we're overloading them with cases from the public defender side. So it's kind of like it's a three-legged stool. You kind of need all three in order to keep that standing so you can sit on it. And so that's I think that's part of the reason why when the governor made her recommendations, probably, she included some language in there that would let us use the money that she did allocate, not just for the recruitment and retention package, but also potentially for some new positions. Our problem is that our request that we've made is essentially the minimum of what we need in order to be able to address all these issues effectively. And I know that's an uphill battle. I know there's a lot of sticker shock involved with it. I know that it's a lot easier for me to come in and tell you, that we need something less than that, but I think it's my obligation as the executive director to be honest with our board and to be honest with the governor and to be honest with all of you about what it is that we need in order to move forward.
Representative Ellis.
You say there's going to be an increase from $80 to $100. Yes.
That's one of the enhancement requests that
And
we
you
made.
need 26 more new positions.
Representative Ellis, can I ask a question? Why, I hate to interrupt you, but I was told by staff that the $80 is the statutory cap and it takes legal authority to raise it to 100. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and in fact, there was a bill introduced just at 3:30 today in the House Judiciary to address that issue.
I just wanted to make sure you knew about that as you were proceeding on it, so go ahead.
Okay. So the $100, $80 to $100, 26 new positions, and all that can be done with 3.6 million?
No, the I think it's 3.5 million is just for the $80 to $100 an hour on the assigned counsel statutory rate. There was the additional money for our staffing requests, which included the public defender positions. The actual public defender positions for the 26 public defender positions was right around $3 million. And then the additional staffing on top of that comes to, and I can break it down for you if you want me to. It's in our report.
Pa-
Yeah.
Page 11, and page 12 gives a little bit more breakdown, but it's 7.8 million for new employees, 4.1 million for raises, 3.5 million for increase in council rate, and then 467,000, which is usually an easy lift for us, for IT security and case management system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And just to clarify, the IT security was given as part of fiscal year 2021, and then we did get the CRF funding for the additional computers. So really the only thing left for the enhancement request for that in fiscal year 2022 would be the $200,000 for a case management system.
What do you use for a case management system right now? What do you do? Do you have an automated case management system?
It is a network of like antiquated access databases and then personal, either Outlook or Google calendaring. I mean, depending on the individual office, it doesn't allow us to interact or to use things in a cohesive manner. One of the benefits to a caseload system is it would allow us to be able to keep better track of our data that we need to be able to keep track of to justify some of our budget requests, but it also would allow better remote use for our attorneys and our support staff when the attorneys are going between their office and the jail and the courtrooms and all of that kind of stuff, so that they can have better access to all of their calendars and to their discovery evidence and a lot of other things and the details of their case information and stuff like that.
Representative Resman.
That $4 million that you mentioned just about 2 minutes ago or 3 minutes ago, is that the $4 million you're talking about here for the governor's recommended?
Yeah, but she made a minor alteration to it that they could use it to hire staff instead of just raises if they wanted to.
You mentioned $4 million. I didn't know where that came from.
Yeah,
That's what you were referring to.
Yeah, the 4.148. Yeah.
And The bill that you said that was introduced at 3:30 today
Yes.
to raise the salaries from $80 an hour to $100.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, does that include this 4.1 million? Or how does that figure into this?
No,
I'm sorry?
It's the 3.5 is the 80 to 100 on the assigned council rate. They're basically subcontractors.
yeah, the difference between that is the two different sides of our system. It's the assigned counsel side is the side that has the $80 per hour rate. Those are the private attorneys that we pay. That in order to raise that from $80 to $100 or anything above 80, even if it's less than 100, requires the statutory change. That was what was introduced this morning.
So the rate change is strictly for the assigned council?
The 3.5 million rate change would be just for the assigned counsel. The 4.1 million that was part of the governor's recommendations is primarily towards the public defender side so that we can stop offloading so many cases to our assigned counsel simply because we don't have the staff there to keep those cases in the public defender's office.
Earlier, you also mentioned about a possible lawsuit if, I guess, if these cases aren't handled properly or in a timely manner. What's the likelihood of that happening?
I think it's very likely. I think it's very likely. And that's partially because we have a Sixth Amendment obligation in order to provide this counsel, and our caseloads being what they are highly problematic right now.
Like 85%, 90% chance?
I mean, I will be honest, it is surprising to me that we have not had a lawsuit yet. So I would say it's pretty high.
Other questions? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking on page 12 for the $719,000 approximately for 13 administrative assistants. So what is approximate pay of these assistants?
Let me get that and I will be able to tell you, because unfortunately I don't have all of this memorized.
Okay.
So let me get my breakdown here. The administrator, you're talking about the 719,000?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That is based on, and this is all detailed in our report, so you can kind of see it broken down better. What that is a base salary of $35,000 with 35% fringe, which roughly for that amount of money ends up being $12,250, plus 8,000, a little over 8,000, 8,075, which is the overhead cost associated with each of those employees. So then that comes out to a total agency cost of $55,324, and then we need 13 of those for the staffing ratios for the appropriate amount of attorneys, minus the staff that we already have. So that's 13 additional ones. So
No,
that's how we got
fine.
to that.
In my head, I was coming up with about $55K each, but I was thinking that's probably full burden cost, not the salary.
Right.
So we keep hearing over and over, and I don't know if it's the state level or county level, about how the assistants are so underpaid and they're on food stamps and everything else, but I'm also was looking at 55K, trying to figure out, okay, what's a breakdown here,
Yeah.
so.
No, that would be a base salary of $35,000.
Okay. Is that a competitive, is that the market salary for that type of a position, or?
I mean, we tried to pick salaries that were mid-range, and because, obviously, it's better if we can get people who are more experienced for those positions, but, I mean, you do end up kind of averaging out sometimes with less experienced people who take the job. So we were aiming for most of these positions to hit like a mid-range base salary as part of this, so that we, weren't aiming too low and then we weren't able to hire somebody if they were experienced.
Yeah. Thank you.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In a regular defender case, how many attorneys usually work per case? In other words, let's say a armed robbery or manslaughter case, something like that.
Generally speaking, on a normal non-murder, non-off-grid case, it would be one attorney and then preferably an investigator and a paralegal and an assistant, like an administrative assistant to help with some of that. Our staffing really isn't such to allow that, so it's generally pretty much the attorney doing most of that with a little bit of assistance from either a paralegal or an investigator if they have somebody in their office, depending on what their individual office case looks like. For premeditated murder cases and off-grids, we generally try to have a first chair and a second chair, so there would be 2 attorneys, but usually there's a lead attorney who does the majority of that work, and frequently the second chair is a younger attorney who needs the additional experience and aids with the case.
And would that also be the norm for if it was a capital case?
If it's a capital case, the standards are a little bit different for that, and they have to have at least 2 people on those cases, and oftentimes, depending on the size of those cases, they need more than 2.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? One question somebody said to me, they said that more important than the assigned counsel case rate was that there were some caps as far as the type of case that an attorney might take, and he may not take that type of case because the caps are too low. Does that ring true?
I think that is somewhat true, although we do have the ability for an attorney to get what's called an exceptional order from their district judge that would allow the judge to approve their voucher over the caseload caps. And our caseload caps on those assigned counsel rates are based on the hourly rate too, and with a calculation as to some number of hours for sort of the average cases there. So if the assigned counsel rate were to go up, those caps would also correspondingly go up a little bit. But there is that out for opportunity for assigned counsel to alleviate those caps if they need to in an individual case for an exceptional order.
And so I don't even know enough to ask the right question, but can you give me some ideas of what the case type caps are for certain types of crimes?
Sure. I actually have that on my, I believe I included that with some of my written stuff here. So our caseload caps right now, based on the $80 an hour rate, for off-grid cases is an $8,000 cap for off-grid. So that would be like murders and Jessica's Law cases is $8,000.
So if I need a public defender because I killed somebody, the attorney that I hired is going to cap out at $8,000.
If they're assigned counsel. Public defenders are not subject to the same caps because they're not paid on that assigned hourly basis.
Okay.
So, yeah. And I will tell you, I mean, $8,000 realistically, if you talk to any attorneys that you know that do criminal law, they'll tell you that nobody would take an off-grid murder case for $8,000. And it's no surprise then, we have a large number of exceptional orders that get signed as a result of some of these caseload caps.
Well, committee, are there other questions? I don't want to limit the questions. I mean, this is one of those issues that's so big, I don't necessarily know the best way to address it. I know that I don't think it's realistic to try to say that we're going to increase their budget by $16 or $17 million. But I do think there's a real need here if we can figure out the best way to get the most bang for the buck. I mean, I don't mind taking a few shots and approaches, if we've thought it through and we're smart on this. Representative Delperdang.
Thank you. I don't know if it's a question for you or you, but if we bring on additional public defenders, does that not reduce the contracted ones?
Yes, but it's not a direct, it won't happen in the same year. And the reason for that is because our public defenders that we're paying out of our budget right now are handling cases right now. Whereas the assigned counsel, when they actually get ready to bill, they have to be completely done with the case, and for the most part, they have to be completely done with the case before they submit their vouchers. So right now, the cases that we're offloading right now to our assigned counsel, because we can't keep those cases in-house due to our caseload problems and our public defenders, those vouchers will not come in for payment probably until fiscal year 20, like the end of 2022, the beginning of 2023. So there will be a point in time in which if you're investing in the public defender's offices, in order to adjust those caseload issues, you will see a decrease in the assigned counsel at some point, but it's going to be delayed by a year or two because it's the difference between paying for the public defenders and what they're doing right now versus paying for the assigned counsel and when they're actually billing.
So is that accounted for in the 16 million, or is it, we're going to have actually a $24 million additional for the year if we hired the additional staff?
That's accounted for in our 16 million. What we would hope is that in a year or two down the line, as you start to see those assigned counsel costs come back down, that you'll start to offset some of our phase 2 and phase 3 requests with some of those savings that we've made as part of our, that will end up being part of our future budget.
So do you have any rough estimates of the savings a year out or so that we could possibly see?
And I put that in my written testimony. And like I said, the real question is, if we're taking those cases back into our public defender side, I mean, we are going to have to pay for those on the public defender side. Now, our assigned counsel are generally $175 more expensive per case. So the real question is, how fast are these cases going to move through the courts right now, which is a little hard for us to be able to predict. In a normal year, I would say we would start to see those assigned counsel costs probably within 18 months to 2 years because of the way that cases are moving. But because cases are moving so slow right now, it may take a little bit longer depending on how fast the court starts to get back up to a normal speed, because cases just aren't moving in general right now. So it's a little hard to predict when you'll see it just because of COVID and that effect on how fast things are moving or not moving through the court system. But normally, it would take a little bit of time to get there.
I don't think there's much payback on investment on this one, Representative.
And
Yeah,
part of it, I'll go on record, part of it's probably our fault, because as we extend out the emergency orders, we're essentially possibly delaying some of the court cases.
Yeah, and I mean, and I will say, this is one of the things that we've struggled with a little bit with, like, the conversation surrounding the speedy trial bills and things like that. I mean, one of the pressures to getting cases settled, because not everything is going to go to a jury trial, and jury trials are really the ones that get really far set out. And having the pressure of the speedy trial does help get those settled quicker. So the further those get extended out, the sort of more complicating it gets with some of these caseload issues.
Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have any idea what kind of liability the state could be facing if we do incur a lawsuit because of the caseload and the constitutional issue?
As far as like what the outcome could potentially be, I mean, I think that based on our caseloads, I mean, there will have to be some investments. I mean, one of the problems if we get to that point is that we kind of lose control over how we do it and how much it's going to cost us. Whereas right now, what we're trying to propose is something that we can do on our terms with our, with the eye towards doing it in a way that will have the most potential offset down the line. Now, just generally speaking, I can tell you that certainly, one of the first things that would not cost us right now would be, if we could avoid a potential lawsuit, would be just literally the cost of the Attorney General and the defense expenses associated with the lawyer's costs. But there's also the benefit of things like avoiding wrongful conviction claims. One of the things I talked about in my written testimony was that we've only had 3 wrongful conviction claims paid out at almost $3.5 million. And we have 26,000 cases that come through our system, closer to 30,000 on a normal year. I mean, even if we manage to, with additional investments, avoid, 3 wrongful conviction claims, that right there becomes a heck of a lot of savings. So, those are the sorts of things that ultimately add to the potential for a lawsuit. The more of those wrongful conviction claims that we have, the worse our caseloads are.
And I'm trying to look for it. Let's see, last year, is that correct? It made it all the way through that we did 539,000 from the state general fund to increase starting salaries for vacant positions in Salina and Sedgwick County, and add 6 positions to the public defender offices in Salina, Topeka, and Wichita for fiscal year '21. Did that happen?
No, that was a request that we made, and ultimately, I think the recommendations at the time out of this committee was closer to 150,000 for just the attorney positions and not the staffing for that. But then when it went to, with the sudden shutdown of the budget and the legislative session, we ended up with just the bare bones budget and did not get that additional funding.
Yeah, you're right. We did 6 out of this committee. That must have been the Senate. We did 6 in Salina and Sedgwick County, so, but none of that made it through.
No, and I honestly think that was partially because of the shortened session, and then everybody, because I think we were overall concerned about what the impact of the state general fund was going to be. We ended up with a bare bones budget.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I will follow up on some of the questions that you guys have asked today, too.
Is there anything else for the committee? Okay, tomorrow, Alexis, do you have it handy what we're doing tomorrow? I'm trying to find it. I think we're doing Sentencing Commission and KBI. Okay, so this is going to be one of the ones we're going to turn around real quick. Board of Technical Professions and abstractors. We'll turn those around tomorrow on here. KBI and Sentencing Commission. So if there's nothing further for the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you.